really, the artist is the host for various memes, ideas, trends that are going on, and the meaning of the work lives somewhere between me and the viewer.
There's something about the democratic nature of putting art in the public realm which I find really exciting. The idea that anybody from any walk of life could see and experience the work for themselves is really rewarding.
So what I like to do is make work that is quite ambiguous, and I create these hybrid objects that then all come together in an installation. And each one is kind of influenced by objects and artifacts and everyday things that inform the work.
I think this whole suite of commissions along the extent of the Tideway tunnel is going to be incredible for London. It's really going to be fantastic. I work primarily with sculpture and drawing, and we're talking today because of my commission for the Tideway super sewer.
I was invited to submit a proposal for the commission. I was really excited, really delighted, because this is my first permanent work of art in the city that I grew up in. So I grew up in West London, close to Ladbroke Grove, Portobello. I think I was quite inspired by the market, all the different characters that would sell, all of the objects and the furniture and the clothes. Visually, they were always really eclectic and interesting, and I think that kind of rubbed off a bit on me.
Well, I think when I was at school, I was super interested in visual arts and also in architecture and fashion design, and I thought that art school was the place to go, and it proved to be really great. You know, I was very lucky. I had free education, I had a full grant, and I went into painting, but I used all the departments. It was quite free. I could still make sculpture, and I used the dyeing vats to make these big kind of cloth works. It was fantastic.
I trained as a textile designer, and so I've got quite a deep interest in materials. Whenever there's an opportunity to test ideas outside of a textile context, that's where I kind of find my most comfortable area in working with other artists or other people who have no kind of connection to textiles. The opportunity to work with architects, engineers, I found it even more interesting, trying to understand how an architect might think, how they see and view the world.
So one of the biggest challenges with this commission was the idea that I had to make work to fit a format which is so different from what I'm used to. I needed to think about how I could create work on a scale, but also things that would fit this particular strange elongated format of a hoarding. The idea of having to create maybe one photograph or several photographs that would find its life on a 25-metre long, thin strip is really quite a challenge. And also the fact that these photographs were going to be seen from a distance because the hoarding goes up across a road.
Stories from the Sewer comes from workshops with children at this local school. We did a series of visits to local landmarks, drawing manhole covers, talking about famous narratives from sewer stories. I take all the ideas and the narratives about the sewer, I translate them with the help of the students into pictures, and then it becomes almost a kind of hieroglyphics where we can move all the pictures around, and by combining them we can then extract meaning from that again. So all the drawings by the students get redrawn as vectors. Some were already done on the iPad so they could be vectorized very easily. Then there's extra drawings of Bazalgette, Thomas Crapper, people from Tideway, tunnel boring machines. Composing that takes time. How do you get these things to hide, multiply? How do you get things to emerge at different speeds? You know, the whole point of the mural is that you don't get it in one go. It rewards multiple viewings. And even today, I was reminded that there's things buried in there that are slow release. And that's what a good artwork is. It's not a one-hit wonder.
I suppose one of the exciting things about making this work was the idea of trying to explore the kind of rich heritage that is associated with this very small geographical site that I was given around the Victoria Embankment. Whenever I make work, there's a lot of research that goes into it. For me, it's an important part of the process is trying to kind of dig below the surface.
My name is Claire Barclay and I'm a sculptor mainly, although I do a lot of printmaking as well. And I mainly make large-scale works that fill spaces and are made in response to spaces and completed in spaces, pulling things from sort of disparate contexts together. And so you end up with these objects that are kind of have a sense of the familiar, but then you can't place them in any particular situation. So they're kind of at once uncanny and odd and familiar. But for this project, I've been commissioned by Tideway to create 2 different commissions for the new site at Putney, and they involve casting a number of oars that have been used on the river that will then become bronze casts that are integrated into the parameter balustrade, and so that you will hold on to them or lean against them while you're looking over into the river. And then there is another work, and that has evolved from plans of an old skiff, a type of rowing boat that's been used on the Thames. When you actually start to look into the history of the Thames, and more generally, it is so fascinating and so wide-ranging, and I can understand why people get so absorbed in researching that.
Colour is a space. When you put certain colours together, they give off a space, like they sit behind or in front of one another. Different colour realms allow for different spaces to emerge. So a watercolour space is different to an acrylic space, is different to an RGB space, is different to a VR space. And that's because of the way the colour is manifest, the stuff of it. And really what I do is I bring all those worlds of colour together and counterpose them to make even more complex worlds of colour. And I think that colour is often misunderstood as frivolous or something that is added, but actually colour is the sort of integral core building block for me. So in designing this thing, I was very aware that we're right next to, residential places. Now, I would clearly want to live with this. I would put it up on my walls. This would be my wallpaper, but this might not be to everyone's taste. Partly, it doesn't matter. That's not my worry. But partly, it's something I'd like to address. My way of addressing it was to give something that was slow release, which I've talked about before, which is this idea that hopefully you don't get bored with the mural because there's things to find in it. So even if you don't like the vocabulary of it, a drawing of a rat might emerge 7 years after it's been installed and you go, why didn't I see that? So hopefully there's something rewarding for the locals. I've tried to be generous with it, and that chimes with my whole approach to making things, which is about hospitality. It's about trying to make things that are entertaining.
So the idea of the form actually references the local history and its connection to the Wandle River. If you explore some of the history around the area, you'll find that there are some really interesting connections to textiles. You'll find that even William Morris had a factory and he would dye his fabrics in the river. So there's this really beautiful history. So the form actually references some of the patterns that you might see within textiles. I really wanted to kind of reference some of the materials that were being produced. So I looked at things like linen, I looked at leather, and that was also the reason why eventually we settled on bronze, because we were able to colour match the metal to some of the fabric samples that I'd collected.
always been really interested in the social potential of art. Made a kind of quite conscious decision to focus much more on public art commissioning. Tideway commissioned a vast document which was called the Heritage Interpretation Strategy, and historians looked at the various sites along the extent of the sewer and discovered historical facts around the neighbourhoods that the sculptures are going to be located in. So the narratives that I was presented with for Acton were around light engineering and production of car engines and racing, a little bit about film as well, because there was film industry there. I found it a very masculine narrative, and I wanted to do a bit of digging myself. And then I found that actually that neighbourhood was also very important for laundries. So when Kensington and Holland Park were being developed as neighbourhoods, women in Acton had started laundries in their homes because that neighbourhood has a lot of fresh water streams running through it, and those home industries really became embedded and very successful. So I thought that was a very important narrative. So one of the sculptures at Acton is kind of a homage to an unknown washerwoman of the past.
So whenever I work with photography, I always use a large format camera. And there's several reasons for that. Partly it's a way of slowing the process of photographing down. You know, you have to put the camera on a tripod. There's a lot of kind of setting up the camera, thinking about the framing that you want. But the other thing is that either using film or a kind of high-resolution digital large format, you get an incredible amount of detail, which enables me to reproduce these photographs on very large scale. And it just gives you that sense of presence. So when you're stood in front of one of these photographs, it's almost as if you're entering into the landscape. The picture kind of reveals all these little narratives and details that maybe you wouldn't see otherwise. So Wonder Karma basically translates to a cabinet of wonders. And of course, the Cabinet of Curiosities was pre-museums. It was like the kind of earliest form of a museum where people would curate this collection of objects from history, maybe contemporary bits of geology, and present them in a cabinet. So what I wanted to do with the artwork was create this photographic Cabinet of Curiosities, bringing together these elements of new things I'd photographed, objects I'd found, elements that were taken from museums, and bring them together, cluster them together in this panoramic view, if you like, which could take the viewers on this journey through the history of the River Thames. Mudlarking refers to something that started in the 18th and 19th century when mostly kids between the ages of 8 and 15 or slightly kind of older citizens would go scavenging basically at low tide. So as the Thames dropped, they'd go onto the foreshore to try and find objects that they could then sell to make a kind of meager living. And it still goes on to this day. There are people who regularly will go mudlarking, this time with their metal detectors to try and discover a bit more maybe under the surface. But over the years, what mudlarking has done is revealed what an extraordinary archaeological site really the Thames is. Having lived in London for many years, I'd never really found any need to go mudlarking. So when I got this commission, I thought actually this is something I've always been interested in exploring and could finally utilise it in my work somehow.
The work will be installed in King George's Park in southwest London. Thinking about the scale of the project as well, of how big it was. It was a really good opportunity to show textiles as a medium to create new works of art in a public setting. It was really important for me to portray an element of fabric or textiles, but with a new material.
Old Father Thames, the language of it, the cholera outbreak. We've got an image buried very deep of a man inside a piece of tunnel from Bazalgette's era, building an embankment, part of the sewer there. So yeah, it's very thoroughly researched, but then on top of that is this layer of humour that hopefully allows everyone access to it. Well, I've referred to it as maximalist. By that I don't just mean that it's the opposite of minimal, but it is visually excessive and visually luxurious, synthesizing lots of different painting languages together into one. But by maximalist, what I really increasingly mean is about complexity, and that is about making big wholes out of lots of small parts.
The idea really just kind of came to me where I thought maybe if the balustrade handrail was broken by casts of oars, then actually people would only realise that maybe they were gripping that or leaning against that in a more subtle kind of way than to create something more monumental. So I quite liked that I was thinking of integrating something in that more sort of nuanced way. The idea came to me that I could find authentic different kinds of oars that had been used on the river and cast them in bronze and integrate them into the handrail so that the bronze would pick up all the detail of the wood and the wear and tear on the wood. And then when I went to research these different kinds of oars and vessels, then I'm starting to realise how beautiful these objects were and how finely crafted they are.
William de Morgan, who was a very talented arts and crafts ceramicist and designer, his factory was at Sands End, very close to Carnworth Road. And I have chosen to create heron motifs. They'll be cast in bronze and they'll go onto a kiosk at Carnworth Road. And the heron motif is used a lot by William de Morgan, so there's a nice link there. Acton is the first site for the sewer system. It's the western extent and it's quite austere, so I hope that these decorative elements will lighten that structure. It's decoration in a way, decorative sculpture.
Normally I'm making work on a more of a domestic scale and within a domestic setting, so not having to worry about the elements. This time we really had to think about the physical environment, how will it affect the work. So this is my first time working with bronze. It's quite a light colour that we've chosen for the bronze, but over time, because of the patination process, it should darken. So I'm really excited to see that change over the next few years. So this is definitely the biggest piece of work that I've been involved in. The bronze will be installed directly onto a concrete kiosk. So you've got two materials working side by side. The scale of it, I mean, it's far taller than I am. It's like the size of a building, and also like the weight of it. It feels like something that's been created on a mammoth scale. And it's something that can be appreciated from an architectural point of view as well. Just looking at the bronze and thinking about how the natural light bounces off of it. I feel like although it's a static piece, to me it feels a tiny bit interactive as well.
It was a real honour to be kind of part of this, to think that this is such an enormous endeavour, to even get your head around the enormity of what this project is about. I think over time we turned our backs away from the Thames. And what's nice about this particular project is this idea that we're trying to re-engage with this important part of our city, and just to kind of think about its legacy and its history and be part of that project has been really enjoyable.
I mean, I had no idea that such a project included so many people. I mean, that was the thing that kind of blew me away. You know, when you see these like public pieces of work, often you might see like the name of the artist, but you might forget that actually there's like a big team of people who are working towards, you know, making that happen. Their skill, expertise it's just like out of this world.
It was quite interesting that we weren't encouraged as artists to address the function of this new sewer within the artworks. Obviously, it's going to really help with the quality of the water, especially recreationally, people, you know, physically being in the water, the wildlife being happier and healthier, and hopefully the fact that there are all these different artwork commissions that will connect different areas and sort of create almost a new pathway along the river's edge. It really emphasises the diversity along the river and the unique histories that are connected with all these different places. There's something very otherworldly about it that I think captures everybody's imagination.